Good evening. I hereby call this April the 10th meeting of the Public Safety Committee to order. As always, we'd like to take a moment and thank everyone for being here. We always like to begin by recognizing our public safety personnel led by our city manager, Mr. Lee Garrity, the city attorney's office, Angela Carmen, the public safety attorney, Attorney Sykes. We'd like to recognize Mr. Mel Sadler with emergency management. He's waving his hand. He's in the room. Our police chief, Barry Roundtree, and the police department, and also our fire chief, Chief Mayo, and the fire department. We appreciate what each and every one of you do to help our city be a better place to live, work, and relax. We will move to the consent agenda. And for those who aren't aware, items on the consent agenda are unanimously approved unless a member of this committee wishes it to be pulled for consideration. With that being said, members of the committee, are there any items that should be pulled for consideration at this time? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the balance. Second.
It's been motioned and properly seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That is unanimous. Item G1, please.
Item G1, recognition of the Forsyth County Fire and Rescue Association Firefighter of the Year Award, Firefighter John Hines III.
And presenting the recognition, again, is our fire chief, Chief Mayo. Chief Mayo, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, members
Good
of the committee. I would like, first of all, to introduce a few folks who are in the room.
Please do.
You might not see them a lot. In no particular order, Battalion Chief Ricky McCutcheon, who's on duty tonight. In the back, we have our newest Battalion Chief, Joe Ramsey, Acting Battalion Chief David Duggins, Acting Battalion Chief Dwayne Jernigan. Dwayne, you BC tonight or STS? BC. Let's see who else. Assistant Chief of Logistics Frank Stowe is back here, and I think the rest of them you're going to get to see up here at the podium.
All right.
That
sounds like fun.
Allow me to introduce those folks to you. If at this time, if I can get Firefighter John Himes and Assistant Chief of Operations Harry Brown to join me at the podium. John, we have a lot of great employees, as you know, Mr. Chairman. And John was recognized this year as the Forsyth County Fire Rescue Association's Firefighter of the Year, and I'm going to let Chief Brown tell you say just a few words about John. And good evening, Madam Mayor Pro Tem.
Good evening.
Thank you, Chief Mayo. Chief Brown.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Afternoon.
Madam Pro Tem and other members of the board.
Good evening.
Tonight here we'll talk about John Himes, who received a very prestigious award. So John was born and raised in Park County. He attended the Forsyth County School System and graduated from North Forsyth High School. He's married to his wife, Teresa, who's in the audience. In 1996, and they have two daughters. His hobbies are hunting, fishing, and camping. John is a member of the local Masonic Lodge, Olympic Lodge 795. He and his family attend Kimberly Park Holiness Church, where he serves as the deacon.
All right.
John's been with the fire department for 16 years and is currently assigned to Station 14 located on Shadowline Drive, where he's earned Life Safety Awards. He's avidly assisted as captain in in-station training as well as training of new personnel who comes into the station. He loves interacting with the community and has gained the respect of his community members and colleagues through his humbleness and strong stance in his faith. John is the 2017 recipient of the Forsyth County Fire and Rescue Association John B. Lewis Firefighter of the Year Award.
Mr. Himes, now you can't get an introduction like that without saying a few words, sir. Would you have some words, please?
I would just like to thank the Winston-Salem County Fire and Rescue Association for the award. I like helping my community, and I'm very active in my community, so it wasn't hard for me to obtain this award. So I just appreciate the opportunity to receive the award. Thank you.
We appreciate your service, Mr. Himes. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can probably to tell, but what I like about John more than anything is 2 o'clock in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, the blood, the smoke, the sweat, the tears. He's always got a smile on his face.
All right.
Next, oh, I'm sorry, your turn.
Item G2, recognition of Forsyth County Fire and Rescue Association Instructor of the Year, Captain Christopher Belcher.
Chief Mayo.
Thank you. I was jumping the gun. Excited. Now I'm going to ask Captain Belcher to come up and Assistant Chief of Safety Training and Special Operations, Tad Byram, is going to introduce Chris to you. Chris is the recipient of the Instructor of the Year for the Forsyth County Fire Rescue Association.
Right.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, members of council, Mr. City Manager. My pleasure to introduce to you Captain Christopher Belcher. He's been a member of our fire department, a city employee since 1999. He was hired in what we call the great class, the big class of 1999. As just said, he's 18-year veteran of our fire department. Right now he's serving as our department's administrative training captain, so he has the pleasure of answering to me. He's certified to instruct in multiple fields, including emergency response to terrorism, hazardous materials, firefighter certification, technical rescue, and emergency medical technician. He has a very key role in our emergency medical technician program. He oversees that and the continuing education for almost 350 people. So that's a big job, it's a lot of weight on his shoulders. He's received multiple life-saving awards from both city and county and a unit commendation from the city. Early in his volunteer career at Beeson's Crossroads Fire Department, he was named Firefighter of the Year and Rookie of the Year. He's taught literally hundreds of classes for our city, Forsyth County, Forsyth Technical Community College, and across the state. And he's recognized statewide for his expertise in fire department response to active assailant situations. He's part of a white paper that's going to be presented to the governor on that subject. He was instrumental in helping us with marketing communications, come up with a training video that other departments have come to us for. He's definitely got a passion for teaching. He strives to pass on this knowledge and experience that he's gained over all these years to new members of the fire department. And the goal is to make sure these folks are equipped with what we call the unconscious competence under unfavorable conditions. Currently, he holds an associate's degree in EMS and a bachelor's degree in fire administration. He graduated with honors from both programs. He's been married to his wife, Christina, for 24 years. They have 2 daughters and 2 granddaughters, and he's played a large role in spoiling those 2 granddaughters. March 14th, 2017, he received the Chris Hooper Instructor of the Year for 2016 for Winston-Salem and Forsyth County, and he was presented this award at the Forsyth County Fire and Rescue Association banquet. And one big thing I'd like to say about Captain Belcher is he's not the type of person that seeks out recognition, so it might be a little uncomfortable for him, but I want to present this to him again.
Hear, hear. Captain Belcher, we can't let you off the hook now. All right, we set a precedent.
It's kind of funny. Stand up in front of a class and talk, but stand out here in public is told a totally different story. As Chief Byram said, I have a lot of passion for this. I like to make sure that things that I've learned and that my fellow firefighters have learned get passed on to the younger generation. A couple years back, a retired battalion chief told myself and one of the other captains said, in a couple more years, you guys are going to be the old heads. And it's reached that point. So I'm trying to make sure that what we know gets passed down. And I could not possibly get this award or do the things that I do without the help of my fellow firefighters that are with the Winston-Salem Fire Department. And I have to commend them and strongly congratulate them on the job well done, because we have training programs going on right now that without them, it wouldn't be feasible or possible. Thank you.
Item G3, recognition of Battalion Chief Marlene Kostrika for Chief Fire Officer designation.
Chief Mayo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask Chief Kostrika to come up if she will. We mentioned this at our awards and recognition ceremony earlier this year, but we did not have the paperwork. I certainly will. Let's make it official. Chief Kostrika has earned her Chief Fire Officer designation from the Center for Public Safety Excellence. And to the best of my knowledge, she is the fourth recipient of this designation in the Winston-Salem Fire Department, and she is the first female recipient of it. So,
all right.
Remarkable job. This is so the Center for Public Safety Excellence. They have the accreditation model for fire departments, and then they have about 5 professional credentials that I think of as sort of an individual accreditation. You have to document and prove that you have accomplished a number of things. How long is the application? 40-some pages? 83 pages. And so you have to establish that you have had a career committed to professional development, education. Overall, you're a well-rounded fire officer. And then, so you have to renew this every 3 years, and for every renewal, you have to formulate and submit a plan for what you're going to do going forward in those next 3 years. So not only do we establish that you have done well in your career, but forces you to, not force, but it requires you to establish a roadmap for future development. So again, quite an accomplishment, and we congratulate her on it. And you want to hear a few words from her, don't you, Mr. Chairman?
Of course, Chief.
Absolutely.
Circle.
I have to move this because I'm shorter. Good evening.
Good evening.
I don't really have a whole lot to say about this. I'm excited that I was able to complete all that paperwork and I had everything that was required, and I was, have been trained through the Winston-Salem Fire Department to show that I had that. The biggest thing for me is I hope that everybody standing over here and others in our department are encouraged to go ahead and do the same process, because it's overall an excellent thing for us to do and a benefit for everybody in the department.
Hear, hear.
Item G4, second annual Red and Blue Holiday Blood Drive report.
Chief Mayo.
Thank you. I'm going to now ask Ms. Susan Allred from the American Red Cross, and Captain John Pennington, and Police Chief Barry Roundtree to join me up here at the podium. And would you like to tell them about the blood drive? Okay. So we conducted a blood drive back in December. Captain Pennington headed it up for us. The police department representative is out of town, but Chief Roundtree can stand in for her, and I'll let Susan go.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, thank you for your time this evening. I did want to mention that thoroughly enjoyed working with Captain Pennington as well as Officer Jenny Britter. Excited to have the police department, a person there with Jenny to actually help promote it and get our numbers up this year. So we're excited to say that we exceeded our numbers from last year by around 30 units, and we collected 149 units, which is wonderful. Since one unit can help save or sustain 3 lives, that one blood drive helped save and sustain 447 patients. So thank you so much for all you do for the Red Cross. Thank you again for your support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, who won? Out of the badges, who won?
You are a wise man, sir. Yes, sir.
He ought to be one of you all.
It'd be nice to say that I see some assistant city managers and some chiefs and department heads that came and gave this past year. Our doors will open on the 21st and 22nd of December, and we have a lot of empty seats that we'd love to fill.
I saw some heads nodding, so there was some confirmation coming from the back.
That was a commitment.
Thank you again for
Thank
your
you
support
again.
of the Red Cross.
We appreciate what you do. Thank you. See if you want to bring us home.
Chairman, Captain Pennington's more of a diplomat than I am. The fire department won.
All right.
And I appreciate this time this evening, Mr. Chairman. As you see, we continue to march a stream of outstanding employees up here before you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief.
And I just want to say before we move to the next item, everybody on this dais, everybody in the community, we sleep very well at night because of the men and women from the fire department knowing that you have our backs and we're safe. So we appreciate what you do, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart, and I know I speak on behalf of the committee. So thanks again. Next item, please.
Item G5, ordinance designating on-street handicap parking spaces in the city's downtown area.
All right, giving us a presentation on this item is our Department of Transportation Director, Director McCullough, Tony McCullough. Good evening.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. At last month's meeting, staff was asked to bring back a recommendation for on-street handicap parking spaces in the downtown area. What we have before you is a recommendation for 4 locations in downtown. You also have attached an ordinance amendment to approve the 4 locations. The 4 locations are on Cherry Street at 4th Street. We've made a recommendation and improvements where an ADA ramp is not available behind the parking spaces. We're recommending ADA ramps to be added. But where there is an ADA ramp or a ramp access available behind where the vehicles would be parked at the back of the locations, we're not making those recommendations. And I will flip through each of those and kind of explain what I'm talking about in a little bit more detail.
Please do.
The first diagram I'm sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
The first diagram at the northwest corner of Cherry Street and 4th Street, we are showing a handicapped parking space on that corner. You will see also on the corner there is a bump out. Because of the bump out and trying to create a ramp where someone in a wheelchair can actually go up to the sidewalk, we're recommending adding an ADA ramp on that corner over the grass strip and removing the bollard in that corner also.
Ms. McCullough, can you define a bump out, please?
The bump out, I'm sorry, it's the curb cut out where the curb cuts out to give a little bit more room for pedestrians to cross. But in that area, there's also a concrete curb where a wheelchair can't go over it.
Thank you.
So, thank you. Sorry about that. Figure number 2 is on Cherry Street on the northeast corner. With the parking space and the back of the parking space being at the corner, there's already an access ramp in that corner area, so we were not recommending any improvements to the curb there. There would just be pavement marking and a sign at that location if this location is approved. The third location is on Cherry Street on the southeast corner. The back of the parking space, as you can see here, we would have to cut into the curb to put in an access ramp. Putting in that ramp would also require that, I'm not sure if you can see very clearly on my picture there, but on your diagrams in your package it might show it a little bit better. There's some on-street outside, sidewalk outside dining. The outside dining area would have to be removed in order to give someone who may be in a wheelchair access to come out onto the sidewalk and be able to maneuver around. The fourth location, very similar to the third location, where we would have to install an access ramp behind the vehicle parking location, and the on-street dining on that corner would also have to be removed in order to give someone access to the sidewalk once they come up on the sidewalk off the ramp. These four locations are recommendations that we thought would be very good locations to try as far as the handicap parking recommendation. It would also require an ordinance approval coming before this committee and then full council anytime that we would then be bringing other future handicap parking space recommendations.
Thank you, Ms. McCullough. I think this is great work by the staff to bring us these particular spaces. It's great work by the community. I think this is good. This is good committee work. Mr. Larson, Mayor Pro Temp, Mr. McIntosh, do you have any comments about anything that we've seen today? I think we're moving in the right direction. Mayor Pro Temp Burke.
I was going to ask a question. Where the restaurant at their sitting-out place?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, have they been made aware of this?
No, ma'am. We have not particularly spoken to either of the business owners. I know one of the locations, though, is they're adjacent to where Camino's restaurant is, and Camino's restaurant was one of the locations that actually had a petition in support of handicap parking spaces. But we will have those discussions with those business owners.
Councilmember Larson.
Am I to understand that all dining, outside dining in those locations would be removed? No.
Just the areas that
just
would
right
be
there where the ramp's
necessary.
being produced.
Yes.
So we're not eliminating outside dining at these locations. We just
Not completely, but they will be impacted.
They're being impacted, and some of the seating will be reduced. Right. I would like to really compliment staff on working on this really hard. I know it's been a long haul to try to find locations that would meet the need, which these four locations seem to be wonderfully located in the heart of the downtown area to provide good access to a variety of locations, and I really compliment staff on that. I compliment them on the ability to then make the modifications that will be needed to make them most accessible. Really a nice job on that. I'm anxious, I think a lot of people are, to see this move forward. The other part of this ordinance, as I understand it, will allow other places to consider handicap on-street on-street parking to be brought forward back to council on an individual basis. So as we look throughout the city in front of churches or what have you that might want to have special conditions, we can evaluate those individually as they come forward to us. This is citywide ordinance, as I understand it. Yes. So I think it's a great step forward, and I recommend approval.
We've got a motion and a second on the floor, but we'll hold for comments and discussion. Councilmember McIntosh.
I want to also thank staff, and I want to thank Ms. Dennis for showing us what one voice can do in the midst of a big city government to get something done. I know it took a lot longer than everybody wanted it to, and so even when we all kind of wanted the same thing to happen, it still, it took longer than we all wanted to. But I wanted to thank you for your perseverance and your outreach.
And if you will, if you would just come to the podium, I know you were very instrumental in helping to push this forward, and just give your name and address for the record, please. We'll be patient. It's okay. If you want to have a chair, a seat, you're welcome to do that as well. Okay.
My name is Nancy Dennis, 217 Tar Branch Court, downtown.
Dennis?
We have been working on this, Mr. Turner and I, since October. And I want to commend his department and the city council. It has been slow, but it's been steady, and as we've all gotten on the same page. These four locations are superb. They've got access for people in wheelchairs. It is in a great location, and it's the beginning of, we will have a city that will be accessible for everybody. So I want to thank John, I want to thank you very much for your behind the scenes, and that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well.
And we're going to have a great celebration when the signs get up and the street gets painted. Be on the lookout, because we're going to have a celebration.
Hopefully I'm invited because I like to have fun.
And we'll invite all of you.
All right. Mayor Pro Tem Burke.
Yes, I would like to say that many times people may say that council people do not work for citizens. This is a very wonderful example showing that we do listen when citizens work in a very positive way for change. Something to happen, it can happen. So the relationship we develop, the PR we develop with citizens like Ms. Dennis and others can go out and share the good news. City Hall doors are open for citizens' participation.
Well, thank you. It's been fun because I didn't even know where you all met.
Great.
Since last fall.
Well, please come back.
Yeah.
And as has been stated, as our city grows and expands, if downtown grows and expands, we have to make our community accessible to everyone. And again, I think this item does exactly that. Members of the committee, we have a motion and a second on the floor to approve item G5. All in favor, please show by saying aye. Aye. Opposers likewise. That is unanimous. Thank you. The next item, please.
Item G6, proposed unified development ordinances, text amendments adding needle and hypodermic syringe exchange program as a use.
All right. This item, we have had this in committee for some time. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
At your March meeting, the committee was presented
Mr. Chairman.
with a proposed text amendment to the zoning ordinance to add the use needle and hypodermic syringe exchange program. The purpose of the proposed ordinance is to regulate the location of such uses. In your packets, you will see identified or marked as version 1. That is the version that you were presented with last month, which limits the needle and hypodermic exchange programs to the highway business, general business, campus, and general office zoning districts. At the request of the committee, we were asked to explore other options and other means of regulating the location of this use. What you have before you are two additional proposals, two additional means of regulation. The first, again, identified as version 2, would allow these needle and hypodermic syringe exchange programs to be located in any zoning district upon the approval of council of a special use district rezoning. As you know, a special use district rezoning follows a legislative procedure, which would allow for greater input, greater give and take conversation with the community. The second new option, identified as version 3, would allow the needle and hypodermic syringe exchange programs to be located, again, in any zoning district, but in this instance, it would be only upon the approval, again, by City Council of a special use permit. Special use permit follows quasi-judicial procedures. Just as an example, the current transmission tower ordinance, those are allowed through a special use permit process through City Council. But again, since it's quasi-judicial, this option would limit the ability of citizens to directly communicate back and forth with you. Additionally, there would need to be 4 findings of fact that would need to be met. There are also the issues of hearsay and competency of witnesses, and for these reasons, it might be best to take your attention back to version 2 because, again, it would allow you greater flexibility for community input.
Thank you, Attorney Contos. Members of the committee, there are a number of people who have signed up to speak on this item. we can sort of hear comments from the committee, or we can sort of turn it over to the community to hear what they have to say. What is the pleasure of the committee? Councilmember
I'd like
McIntosh.
to ask Jerry a question before we have.
Please.
Might provide some clarification.
Attorney Contos.
So Jerry, can you just walk us through, if I wanted to obtain a permit either under number 2 or number 3?
Correct.
Tell me what the difference would be from a public-facing standpoint. What would my steps be?
In terms of the application process, or in terms
Yeah,
of
are there
even
major
interaction?
differences between the two?
The one thing I'm not aware of, and I'll have to get back with you, I don't believe anyone from our planning department is here, is the cost. I believe the special use district, or special use district rezoning, let me get back with you with a firm number, but I want to at least give you a ballpark. I think that would be in the $1,000 range.
That's my recollection.
Yeah, right.
Special use permit application, quite frankly, I suspect it's lower. Again, I'd like to get you a firm number, but I'm going to speculate in the $200
Does the special use permit require signage? I think that's why the other is more expensive, right? Does it cover some of the cost of publication? Or
There will be additional, in both instances, there is
They're similar.
signage. The special use permit signage is, for lack of a better phrase, it's a bit flimsier. In other words, it's a piece of cardboard, whereas the rezoning is an actual
Full
metal post, and it has to be posted in 2 locations around the property. So,
good enough.
Any other questions from Mr. Contos?
Did you understand the difference between the legislative and special use in terms of the actual hearing itself?
Probably worth spending another minute or two on that, just not only for our edification, but public.
okay. And I think I'm going to begin my focus on the special use permit procedure again, because it is quasi-judicial. That term, quasi-judicial, it is like quasi a court. So in those instances, the law imposes a duty upon the council not to engage in ex parte communications, similar to a court hearing where I cannot, in advance of the hearing, go and have a conversation, a private conversation with a judge. And so that's a little different, not only for the citizenry, but even the council members, because I'm certain your preference would be to engage your citizenry. So it's a bifurcated process to that extent. Similarly, when speaking of, for example, property values, in order to be able to qualify as a competent witness, though you are able to speak to your beliefs as to the impact of a particular use on your property, the law presupposes that you have enough knowledge to be able to ascertain the impact of something on your own property. I could not, for example, get up and speak about a neighboring owner's property or even another neighborhood's piece of property unless I were qualified either as an appraiser or a real estate agent. So again, it to a degree limits the ability of the citizenry to get up and just give their opinion. It's a lot more regimented, just as it would be in court.
Mr. McIntosh, if your question's been satisfied.
Good, thank you. Appreciate
Thank you, Attorney Contos. Members of the committee, is there anything that we need to discuss before we move forward to hearing from those who have signed up? All right. First on the list is Sarah Howell. Please, if you can, if you don't have to, but if you want to come and speak, if you would just give your name and address for the record and keep your comments limited to maybe 2 or 3 minutes.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sarah Howell, address is 906 West Street. I live across the street from Green Street United Methodist Church, where the Syringe Exchange is located. And I just want to share that I feel like this is having a positive impact on our neighborhood. Multiple lives have already been saved based on the distribution of naloxone from there. And it being in the neighborhood has, I think, contributed to helping my neighbors. I also, when this issue first came up, I sought to educate myself about the history of zoning in Winston-Salem, and obviously zoning is an important thing, but it also has a long history of being used for segregation and for pushing out undesirable populations. And I read about several instances of syringe exchanges in other parts of the country being negatively impacted to the point of having to close any permanent location because of zoning. And so my fear around this, even with special use permitting or something like that, is that would end up having the same impact on a service that's desperately needed right now. So I think that bearing in mind that history and those tendencies is important.
Thanks for your comments, Reverend Howell. Colin Miller. Hopefully I got your name correctly, sir.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Give your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, Colin Miller, 1039 Montgomery Street. I'd like to thank the council members and Mayor Pro Tem for having me back. I guess I did bring Tessie Castillo with me from the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition. She usually does a lot of work in the General Assembly and over there. But I did want to talk a little bit about some different research that I have pulled up, some different findings and research papers that I have on my phone right here. If you look, now I understand that the question of this is what the impact might be to the neighborhood. If you comb over the literature, and there's been significant research done on this. Now, there hasn't been research done on this in the size of the city that we have, but there have been in cities like Baltimore that's about as close as you can get, just because syringe exchanges are something that just haven't come to smaller sized cities yet. But there have been studies that have been done on the impact of syringe exchanges on the immediate neighborhood around them. There's one that was done in Baltimore about discarded needles and seeing if discarded needles increased after the opening of syringe exchange. The findings basically showed that there was absolutely no increase. There was actually a decrease in the number of discarded needles found in this neighborhood in Baltimore after the syringe exchange opened. And all these studies that I'm going to be referring to and the studies that Tessie is going to be referring to, we can definitely send you the actual full study if you're interested in perusing this stuff. But I guess since there's a lot of people to speak, I'll just be quick. I guess the issue that I have is that, just like last time, what I said, no one in the community was actually contacted about this. No, it wasn't discussed with the people who are running the exchange. It wasn't discussed with people who are directly impacted. What this is a couple of people who own some properties in the neighborhood banding together with a few other people who are adamantly opposed and basically going to a council member and trying to get this through under people's noses. If you talk to people in the neighborhood, and Salvador Patino of the West Salem Neighborhood Association spoke to this in the article that was in the Journal today, basically saying that I don't think that many people in the neighborhood are actually adamantly opposed. There are some people that have questions about it. There are some people that are reserving judgment. But the majority of people in the neighborhood are nowhere near against this. And anyone that lives in the vicinity around the church, even those who are opposed, will tell you that there has been no impact, no increase in foot traffic, no discarded syringes. None of these things that people have worried about have come to fruition. So I'm asking the council to just question, what is the impetus for putting in these zoning regulations that could potentially put roadblocks in the way of services that we really need to have? The head of the National Institute on Drug Abuse spoke at the Winston-Salem Biotech today and was talking and speaking to the need for syringe exchange, naloxone access now, and talked about how we had been sort of slow in implementing a lot of this stuff in many areas of the country. We don't have time to sit here and say, oh, well, we're going to do special, permits, and we're going to do this zoning stuff, and we're going to put roadblocks in the way of services that are desperately needed now. I mean, the count for overdose reversals from naloxone that we've handed out is up to 26. That's 26 human lives in about 4 months' time. And those are people who are West Salem residents, you know? So I just want to kind of put that out there. And I do have other studies that I'm more than happy to send you on the impact of syringe exchanges on the surrounding neighborhoods. And, yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Have you
Oh, no,
finished your
you're
comments?
good. You're good.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Next on our list, we have Corinne Cosby. And again, if you can give your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Corinne Cosby. I live at 732 South Green Street. We moved to West Salem in 2009 with our 3 children. We have lived a block south of Green Street since then. Our youngest was only 3 months old when we moved to West Salem, and we chose the location because we appreciated the diversity that the neighborhood had to offer. My husband and I, we firmly believe in living in complex community. Rather than shelter our, I'm going to read some from my notes. Rather than shelter our children and protect them from the world, we have intentionally chosen to live in West Salem. We have actively been involved with local associations, local organizations that work with homeless shelter, and we have been made aware of the large number of addiction problems facing our guests at the shelter. Recently, I was made aware of this through my friendship with Colin Miller and Sarah Howell, in addition to one of our neighbors who has actively campaigned against this needle exchange. I wanted to let you know that initially I may have been skeptical of the program, but through some education of myself and through the fact that I have not even noticed any difference in traffic on my street. We've had trouble with drugs before in West Salem. It continues to be an ongoing problem, but it has been nothing that that we've not been able to address with the partnership with the Winston-Salem Police Department. And that has been something that we work to address on a case-by-case basis. And at no point since the opening of the clinic have my husband and I noticed any increase in traffic, fear for our safety or the safety of our children. Knowing that most of the persons who are coming to use the needle exchange program are members and neighbors of West Salem is encouraging to me, because knowing that people in our neighborhood are getting access to clean needles is something that I appreciate, rather than knowing that there are neighbors who have need who aren't able to access clean needles. If I had to choose between a clean user and a dirty user, I would choose a clean user. So that's just as a mother who's living in the neighborhood. I know that this is a complex issue, and I know that there are no easy solutions, but I do want to support, and I want you to know that I support the location of the current needle exchange program.
Thank you, Ms. Cosby. Thank you. Next on the list is Mr. Jonathan Michaels. Okay. No problem. Ms. Wilson. Okay. All right. Tessie Castillo. All right. Okay. Ms. Castillo, we're giving everyone 2 to 3 minutes to speak, and if you would just give your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. Tessie Castillo. I live at 1033 Oak Lake Court. And I am the Advocacy and Communications Coordinator for the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition. We are a statewide nonprofit. We have been at the forefront of the opioid drug crisis throughout the state. We've worked with the Winston-Salem Police Department to equip their officers when they became one of the first departments in the state to carry naloxone. And we have been behind helping protect communities from HIV and hepatitis C, and to keep people healthy and safe until they can enter their recovery journey if they do struggle with addiction. So what we have done is, before we started advocating for syringe exchange programs in North Carolina, we looked at the data from around the rest of the country. Needle exchanges have been operating in many other states for as many as 30 years. So the data on them, and there's been many, many studies on neighborhood impact, because as you can imagine, when these first come into being into a new area, there's a lot of questions and concerns from neighborhoods. So there have been studies on the impact on crime, on the impact on drug use, on the impact on discarded needles in the area surrounding the exchange, on the impact of needle stick injury and also on the impact on whether or not people are entering drug treatment. And the evidence that we have found and the evidence that enabled us to work with members of law enforcement and members of the General Assembly to take them from a very, very skeptical position initially when they heard about it to legalizing syringe exchange last year with very heavy support from law enforcement, chiefs of police, and sheriffs, was that they saw the evidence. And it was very, very clear that the number of discarded needles actually goes down in a neighborhood after syringe exchange is implemented. That is because the exchanges collect those used needles and they incinerate them, which is a service that was previously not offered in the community at all. Crime has been shown to also drop slightly in these neighborhoods, and the reason for that is because the people who are receiving the syringes receive much more than just syringes. They're also given access to social services. They're given HIV and hepatitis C testing. They're given referrals and entry into drug treatment programs. And so we see people who often before were disconnected even from existing social services. Drug users, and especially injection drug users, are one of the most marginalized members of our community. They don't have contact with any of our regular healthcare systems or social service systems. And so through the syringe exchange, that's often the one place where they will go, where they feel like they are not judged. And so that's the one place that can and does connect them to social services. So we've seen actually that people who participate in a syringe exchange are 5 times more likely to enter drug treatment than people who do not. So that's another reason that you see crime and drug use actually decrease when these are around, because they're able to reach out to a community of people that was completely isolated before then. Needle stick injury also goes down 66% in an area with a syringe exchange. And again, that is because instead of people carrying around their dirty needles and reusing them, they are returning them to the syringe exchange and they're being incinerated. So these are some of the benefits. Again, 30 years of experience looking at this. There are currently 19 syringe exchange programs in North Carolina that have been established during the past few months after it was legalized. And I would really urge you as a community to look at the data that's existing from other syringe exchanges and to consider the impact. I do understand that syringe exchange is sometimes a scary issue for people when they hear about it for the first time. They don't always understand the benefits. They're concerned about their neighborhoods. But the evidence shows that these do not have negative impacts on neighborhoods. And I would urge you to not react, I think, on fear and some misinformation, because really when people get to know the syringe exchanges and they've been around for a little while, they do support them. So I do think that this is a result of syringe exchange being very new in North Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We have one last person signed up to speak, Pastor Kelly Carpenter from Green Street Church. You have the floor. If you give us your name and address for the record, please, sir.
I'm Kelly Carpenter at 820 Miller Street. Council members, Mayor Pro Tem, thank you for letting me speak. If you forget any of my comments, they're all in your inbox. Just let you know. Green Street Church has a long history of ministry with populations of people who are often unwelcome in other places. We are not only active in the ministries ourselves, but we see it as part of our mission to provide space for those who are doing good work, for those who are often marginalized and excluded. Our collaboration with the Shalom Project, the Institute for Dismantling Racism, AIDS Care Service, Narcotics Anonymous, North Star LGBTQ Center, and a host of other organizations that provide programs for people in need. This is a vital part of our mission as a church. The request from the Twin City Harm Reduction Collective is to provide space and time for them to hold the needle exchange was in line with our ongoing commitment. The Leadership Council examined the safety plan that TCHRC has, the statistical data available at the time, and we have held the Harm Reduction Collective accountable to some concerns that have been raised by the neighborhood as well as our own members, and they have been more than responsive. As of 2 weeks ago, the Needle Exchange Program has seen over 40 people. 3 have been, at the end of March, I think a little bit more, as Mr. Miller said, have had 22 overdose reversals, 7 at the end the last week of March. 8 of the addicts have received referrals to rehab. 4 of them have completed the programs. Well, the greatest concern we have heard was an increased traffic of people from outside of West Salem. Over 60% of the people that have come from West Salem. Simply put, this program is already saving lives and many already within the neighborhood. Winston-Salem is not unique in a long history of using zoning laws to segregate and to discriminate. Every suburb in the United States had its founding documents ensuring racial exclusion. But using the same type of law to discriminate against illegal activity, needle exchange, or to regulate its ability to function freely in a faith community building, I think is an unjust and unnecessary hurdle against an effort to save some lives. As a community of faith, we wonder how city council members feel about the government trying to tell us who we can be in ministry with within our building. Will our work with people infected with HIV or alcoholics or addicts be zoned out in the future? We wonder about this. We believe that this effort to restrict clean needle exchange further stigmatizes a needed program and that it is built on unfounded prejudices. We request that you vote it down on any effort to use zoning to inhibit such a program from happening. And I hope that it spreads all across the city, and I hope other faith communities will join us in the effort to save some lives.
Thank you. Members of the committee, we have several options before us. We could limit these to certain zoning districts. The second option is that we could allow these exchanges in any zoning district upon the approval of the elected body for a special use district rezoning. And I think the final option is a special use permit, which requires the approval of this elected body. A fourth option might be to hold it in committee for further discussion and consideration. So those are our options. What is the pleasure of the committee? Councilman Belos.
Mr. Chairman, since I seem to be the target of these discussions, predominantly because the first occasion happened to happen in the South Ward. And I thought that we needed to look at a function that the city had imposed upon it by the state legislature, a new activity regulated by licensing and certain administrative matters of reporting being covered, but no commentary about how it was to function in placement within the landscape of the town. The intent was that every function that occurs in this city has some regulatory aspects. It has, whether it be a junkyard, or whether it be a doctor's office, whether it be a restaurant, these functions occur within the landscape of a zoning ordinance. And how we craft that ordinance and how we allow things to exist. This proposal has nothing to do with the validity and the value that a needle exchange has to this community as a item that can aid us in dealing with an epidemic that we're currently experiencing in this community. This has never been a question of what trying to eliminate, trying to impose difficulties of implementing this. This is an important function, and that's never been a question about it. The work that Green Street Methodist does as a community church is well known and valued. This is not about Green Street Liberty Church, Green Street Methodist Church. This is about a function that is going to impact the whole town of Winston-Salem, not just West Salem. It's about a function that needs some acknowledgement as to how it is integrated into our daily lives. And we can decide on that as a community, how we want to do that. To simply say that we are going to ignore that and it's going to be a free-for-all, a free fire zone, is probably not an acceptable solution. The problems that arose initially was that this was something new. It came into a neighborhood. The neighborhood got unnerved somewhat about it. Questions were raised. Questions are still being raised, and the discussion is ongoing. We have in front of us two options currently. One allows us to designate 3, 4, 5 zoning categories, whatever we decide to do, to specifically say to the public, this is where this function will occur, and you'll be aware of it. The practitioners will know where they're allowed to go, and the residents or the neighbors or whatever will know where it's likely to go, and everybody's playing on the same playing field. If that's not acceptable, as part, and that's generally how zoning's handled, regardless of what the function is, then the other choice that's being laid in front of us is one that says we can place it just about anywhere. However, there will be a public process in doing that, and it'll involve basically a zoning process that has public input, but it will allow each case to be evaluated on its own merits, whether or not the neighborhoods object to it or opposed to it, or whether it's a good location, whether it makes sense, what have you. I think that both of these options have strengths to consider. The second one allows maximum flexibility for public input. It allows maximum flexibility for placement of these kinds of functions. And if that is what the community desires, I am happy to pursue that. If they want a tighter regulation, and if this council prefers not to review every case that comes forward, I can't imagine we're going to have more than a dozen of these things, but maybe, as Reverend Kelly says, maybe they'll be all over the city. Then each one would have to be reviewed and approved by the council, and I'm certainly prepared as a council member to look at that if that's what the public needs, if that's what the public wants. That's what the intent of this question is about, and what I'm asking the council to do, and I'm happy to table this if there needs to be further discussions on those two options. But I'd prefer this not to continue to evolve around one church and one neighborhood. I would prefer that it evolve around the question of what do we want to do for the city as a whole, and what would work best for the implementation of this function within our town activities, within our city activities. And I will defer and listen to my other council members in this matter, but I don't think that doing nothing is really an option here. We are going to have some clarity and transparency in how this function is laid in to our landscape, and that's what I'm going to try to achieve with this action.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say there have been, I think, decades of sort of experience with needle exchange programs. This is not something new. It's new to North Carolina, but I think nationally and internationally, they are viewed as a very positive force in the fight against drug addiction. We currently allow self-help or halfway houses of a variety of different types within any zoning jurisdiction in the city. I started out here in Winston-Salem in the Holly Avenue neighborhood. We had 6 different ones over the course of time. Some were great neighbors and some were not so great neighbors. It wasn't the fact that they were doing a particular job, it was more their behavior versus the use that was in them. So I've got a little bit of problem with the use being the issue. To me, it is what are our remedies if a needle exchange or a runaway home for teenagers, if they start to have a negative impact on their surroundings. How do we step them back? What's our ability to corral that bad behavior? Right now in my neighborhood out near Wake Forest, there's a home for troubled youth. It's very well managed. There's never an issue around it. So it's really, to me, it's more about the behavior. Is it being run well? Is it being operated with the neighborhood in mind, with the fact that it's in a residential setting? I have a hard time pushing it towards a commercial setting. I think that the efficiency of it, the efficacy of it is significantly lessened by that. To me, it's about how well the program is run. Very shortly after I got on council, I started asking Chief Roundtree about where were we with heroin overdoses in Winston-Salem. A good friend of mine's son passed away from that. And I know High Point has had a very bad problem with it, and they sort of foreshadowed our experience, so we knew it was coming. We have to deal with this, and I think that if we make it difficult, then we cost people's lives. So I'm supporting having it as many locations, including my neighborhood. If people want to come to my neighborhood, I'm fine with that.
I think we agree that this is not a West Salem issue. This is a citywide issue that we should look at evenly across the board. Everybody knows that these particular facilities are necessary. I think the controversy comes in that nobody really wants them in their backyard except a few people, and that's fine. But I think that the community should be given the latitude to make their own decisions about this. I believe that the wisest decision, if we had to make a decision today, would be to consider the special use district rezoning, which allows greater flexibility and community input. But we have to do something. I just want to commend Green Street for the work that they're doing, and I want to preface my comments by saying, you know, in my former life a couple of years ago, I did run a drug treatment court for the state of North Carolina here in Forsyth County in the courthouse. So I'm not insensitive to the work that's going on. I think it's great work, but again, this is not directly aimed at the Green Street or the West Salem community. This is something we have to address all across the city. I saw some hands up in the audience, and what we want to do is I think we've sort of closed the public hearing part of it. So I do apologize. I don't want to be rude, but we don't want to belabor the hour. Members of the committee, we have a decision to make. Mayor Pro Tem Burke, we haven't heard from you, but we want to sort of move forward with what we want to do. You have the floor.
I would like to say that it was stated by one of the individuals, when you are afraid, sometimes when you fear things, you don't want to get involved. But when you have a good understanding, it is always better for the mind. I would like to say to Reverend Carpenter how much I appreciate you. When you go to your church, you have a diversity of all kinds of individuals. It is a very open church. And your efforts to work with all people, you ought to be commended. When I want the attorney to answer this, when Reverend Carpenter mentioned about us legislating on what people can do in their churches, and I don't know if I'm saying it like he said it, but for instance, are we stepping out of line? Are we in?
We're in line, Councilman Burke, with the draft ordinances that you have before you.
Mm-hmm.
The land use and the impact on the property that we're actually looking at, in particular concerns about traffic that can be generated by this particular vehicle. We're not legislating what can be done about the church. We're looking at land use and
I can understand all the comments I've heard. The one that I agree is Councilman McIntosh, when he mentioned people have to have somewhere to go. And there are a lot of things none of us want in our neighborhoods. But if it's controlled, it seems to me we have better way of doing something. Even if we say we don't want to have it, there are going to be places that people are going to be exchanging these needles. And we would rather say that we took a serious look at this and we came up with a solution. We have quite a few folks using the needle. And I would rather for us to think about them being able to get a clean needle than going somewhere slipping around with the dirty needles, because we know as a city, our sanitation department had to deal with a problem.
Right.
We had our workers picking up needles and being harmed. If it's in a location where the needles are carried back, we stand a better chance of less folks being harmed by people throwing those needles around. So I would want you to know I'm very sensitive about inclusion and taking care of folks. And whatever we could come up, Councilman Larson, with this council, that we can show when we have partners working with us that we can work with them, because it saves a lot of our citizens. This particular with the drugs and the legal.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Burke. Again, I'll recognize Councilmember Larson in just a second. I think we all agree that Green Street Church does an excellent job with needle exchanges and needle exchange in our community. We all agree that this is a necessary entity to work with members of our community who do have drug addiction. My question to the committee is, we have 3 options on the table. How do we want to move? We also have a 4th option to hold this in committee for further consideration. So what is the pleasure of the committee? Councilmember Larson is recommended.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask Mr. Miller to come to the podium again? Would that be acceptable?
If you have a question,
specific question.
We saw some other hands, so we have to.
Yeah, no, this is specifically related to his program.
Mr. Miller, please.
Mr. Miller, when you appeared before us on other occasions, the question was raised to you whether or not a special use zoning or any of these options would be acceptable.
Right.
Is it still your opinion that no zoning of any kind would be acceptable for this function?
Absolutely.
So you would oppose any of the options that are currently on table?
Strongly in both ways.
Yes. Okay. I want to be clear about that. This matter, all of the 3 proposals do allow Green Street to continue into June 2019. You're aware of that, of course.
I am aware of that.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I think I would, at this point, recommend that the committee accept version 2, which is a case-by-case study of any requests. This would allow any existing organization 2 years to come back with the information that they've shared today and receive a permit if they choose to continue to do so, and allow any other location to justify their location on a one-by-one basis.
There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Seeing none, the motion dies for lack of a second. Councilmember McIntosh is recognized.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to bring this back to committee in a moment. Obviously, I don't think we can have something that's comfortable for us here, but of the 3 proposals that we have, I think there needs to be more conversation around the table and out in the community about it. So I would prefer to spend a little bit more time on it. If we do that, will their operation be able to continue? So,
Attorney Carmen.
My preference would not be hasty. I'm not comfortable with any one of these 3. Personally, I'd like to see it come back to us next month.
And normally, Councilmember McIntosh, we would have conversation around that and just sort of make a move. But because we're putting motions on the table formally, would you put that in the form of a motion, please?
I move that we continue this. We bring this back to this committee in 1 month's time.
It's been motioned. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Discussion.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Burke.
Now, we could keep coming back to committees, but I feel if we're going to come back, then we ought not have to come back after this particular time. And, Mr. Chairman, I would advise Councilman Larson, City Manager, you need to make sure the other elected officials give their input, and we need to bring something to a closure.
Councilmember Larson.
Yeah, I'm not sure we accomplish anything by delay, but I'm happy to do that, and I'm happy to have a continuing dialogue on this matter if new ideas or new proposals can be brought forward, but I'm not hearing any. I do think that it would be useful to try to address the question that was raised, and that was one of enforcement or of making sure that if there's a problem arising, how do we deal with it? And I heard this from Councilmember McIntosh as well. And I don't know if there's anything that this council can do in these deliberations that would help clarify that matter. I think that concern exists under any of the proposals that we have in front of us this evening. If we have non-compliance or problems begin to arise around these issues, the ability to cancel licenses or whatever would be some clarification of all of that might be useful, so we have a fuller understanding as to what we're able to do, even if no ordinance is passed. Then these functions are continuing to operate within our communities. What mechanisms are there if problems begin to arise?
Thank you, Attorney Carmen. Mr. Larson, it sounds like the motion has been to continue this item collaboratively between the motion and the second for a maximum of 1 month, where it returns back to this committee, and we will move forward on an up or down vote at that particular time. All in favor, please show by saying aye. Opposers likewise. That is unanimous. This item stays in committee for 1 month. Thank you. Attorney Carmen.
Once you all decide which option you want to pursue, it goes to the planning board, the planning board process as well. So we'll have that hearing at the planning
If we
board
choose an
before
option.
council.
If we choose an option.
Well, if you choose an option.
Yeah, right.
Thank you. The next item, please.
Item G7, findings from 1/3 compensation and study.
All right, we will pause for just 1 moment to allow those who will exit the room to exit.
Yeah, we at one time had something like a public hearing on an issue like this. Just the ones who wanted.
If the committee
Could you restate the comment
Yes.
and then give us an answer, please?
The comment from the Mayor Pro Tem is on an issue like this, would there be more public input? Yes, if the committee decided that you wanted to pursue any of those options, we would generate a request to the planning board. It would go through the complete UDO text amendment process, and there would be public hearings before it comes back to full council, well, through this committee and to full council to vote on.
I think we probably want a little more. Because we only see one.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. All right, item G7, it has been introduced. Mrs. Caruth, I think this item was presented in finance. I came in on sort of the tail end of it, so I did get to hear the majority of it. So I don't think that a presentation is necessary at this particular time. Members of the committee, are there any items that we need to cover, anything that you may not have heard or want to have discussion on? Again, we want to be as efficient as we can. Councilmember McIntosh.
The peer cities that were used were 14 peer cities.
Yes.
How do we take into account, or do we take into account in that those set of numbers about cost of living? Of those 14 cities, do they skew higher than Winston-Salem for cost of living, or lower than Winston-Salem for cost of living, or is it roughly a wash?
And can you give us a little background on those peer cities and why we're bringing them up? For those who don't know the item that we're discussing.
Sure. Typically, when we look at selecting communities to be benchmarks, there's a variety of factors that are taken into consideration, realizing that you're never going to find a community that is exactly like yours. So the factors that we take into consideration is we look at geographic location. So who are your neighbors? We look at the size of your organization. We take into consideration organizational structure and the level and types of services that are being provided. We take into consideration, some demographics, growth patterns, those types of things. So the goal of that is to come up with a grouping of cities where, realizing that some might be, a little bit higher in cost of living, some might be a little bit lower in cost of living, some might be slightly bigger, some have different issues, that when you put them all together, they come up with kind of an average of kind of an approximation of the city of Winston-Salem or whatever community we're doing.
So you feel pretty strong that they're not skewed high
Yeah,
and low?
yeah. And when we do the data analysis for the market survey information, we do a very detailed data point by data point analysis. So if any wages come in that might skew the data, we pull that information out of the analysis so that we're not getting those skewed.
Thank you.
And this is in reference to the classification process for the compensation program for city employees. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Have your questions been satisfied, Councilmember McIntosh? Is there anyone else that wishes to be heard on this item? I understand that this does not require a vote. This was just for information. So, ladies, we appreciate you bringing this information to finance and for answering the question here for public safety. We appreciate your time. Thank you. Move on to the next item, please.
Item G8, presentation of 2017-2021 strategic plan.
I guess giving us the information on this item, it says here, Mr. Ben Rao, Assistant City Manager.
Thank you, Chairman Taylor, Mayor Pro Tem Burke, members of the City Council. Mr. Scott Tesh, who is the Director of our Office of Performance and Accountability, is going to guide you through this particular item.
Director Tesh.
Chairman Taylor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the committee. Last week you received a presentation on the strategic planning process We talked about the process that's been undertaken to get here. We looked at the details of some of the strategic plan at kind of a high level and talked about next steps. One of the first next steps was to come back to the mayor and city council to ascertain feedback on the individual action items associated with the strategic plan. Draft strategic plan will come to each committee. We missed finance just barely, but we'll go to each committee, and the memo provided showed that there are certain sections of the document that might be reviewed by each committee. Public Safety Committee would most likely look at safe and secure community, although you can look at any portion of the document. We're simply looking for feedback on those action items. The strategies you guys voted on at the January workshop, and so unless you have strong objections to changing anything that's in the strategies themselves, the action items are what we're looking for feedback on. At the pleasure of the chair, we could go through them, or you could just provide feedback as you feel necessary.
Members of the committee, what is the pleasure?
Well,
Mr. Larson.
Yeah, I've looked at the safety and security section, which is most applicable, and I only really have one comment, and that deals with strategy 3.6, item 3.61, and it involves evaluation of fire operations training facilities needs. And I would like that to be a little more inclusive, to say evaluate fire operations facility, well, not just training facilities, but all fire department facilities, period. Be fire stations, training facilities, what have you, as part of an overall assessment of our long-term fire department needs. It's sort of focused. We sort of focus it on one training session, but I would hate to do the training session at the expense of a fire station that was needed, and we don't seem to address that in this document.
Make that change.
Okay. Director Tesh, did you get that?
Yes, sir. We will make sure that an action item is included that looks at all related infrastructure to fire department and public safety.
Any other comments?
I mean, this is a very
Councilman Larson.
very comprehensive document. I don't know that we get all our comments in here. I mean, would staff prefer that we bring it directly to you or to the department heads or
either to myself, Mr. Rao, or Mr.
Scott? Yeah. Okay. That would be my preference.
And since we held it in finance for another month, you got plenty of time to.
Director Tesh, one of the things that's near and dear to my heart is, how we merged Youth Build and the Successful Outcomes After Release program. One of the things that I could not speak about at the last committee meeting because I sort of lost my voice, and Councilmember McIntosh had to fill in for me, is our passion for the Youth Summer Employment Program. I do know that it was sort of late in the game to implement that program this summer. It's my understanding that the program is a 2-year grant to the current organization that utilizes this program for the community. I would just ask that we re-look at this program for 2018 to implement this for 2018. So if this is a 2-year grant, I'd ask that we consider it to be a 1-year grant just to move us through this summer, and that we take this on and implement it for 2018. And since this is a discussion about the strategic plan, I think it's very fitting to have that discussion at this time. Mayor Pro Tem Burke.
Yes, I would like to also know the agency that's been working with them, what is their track record for this success? That's what, and how many has been involved, and how many years they've been working with the program. One thing we have done, we've seen money invested, but we don't always see the end results of that money.
Right.
It's good for them to say, but we need some actual proof. I can say I had 100, and 100 went this place, but we need some actual facts.
Yes, ma'am. There is an action item in the plan related to bringing back a full report on the Summer Youth Employment Program and alternatives for providing it. I believe it's in the
early fall, right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
In the next couple of months.
We're only going to do a 1-year contract. We already told them.
Perfect. All right. Is there anything else that needs to be discussed on this particular item? Mr. Tesh, we thank you for your time as well.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So we're moving on to, well, that was the last item on the agenda.
Yeah.
I'll give us another item. Is there anything else that needs to be discussed for the good of the order, considering we are at the end of the agenda?
Do we have the police department still here?
Councilman Larson.
I got a notice from the police department that says April 9th through the 15th is to be designated National Telecommunication Week. Is that correct? And then these are the people that are our 911 first responder people. And I think if that's the case, we need to recognize them and thank them for their service this week. I don't know that I'll get a chance to do it on Monday, so I'll do it tonight. Thank you very much. Would you like to say anything, Chief Roundtree? Since they all call your house, you know, it might be, or
Chief Roundtree is recognized.
Good evening. Thank you for giving me an opportunity. This is National Telecommunicators Week, where we will be honoring our telecommunicators. They do serve as telecommunicators for not only the police department, but for also our fire department. We do have a few events and treats that will be planned for them during this week.
thank all of them for doing that for us.
I will. Thank you for mentioning it.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Councilmember Larson. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Seeing nothing further, we consider this meeting to be adjourned. Thank you.